My name is Isabelle Carter. I'm 26 years old, and for many years I believed the woman my father married had stolen the place that belonged to my mother. I was wrong, but it took me almost half my life to understand it. When I was growing up, my world felt safe. My father owned a small auto repair shop on the edge of town. He worked long hours, yet he always came home with grease on his hands and a smile on his face. My mother taught at the local elementary school. She had endless patience and made every ordinary day feel special. Every evening she read a different story before I fell asleep, and I believed nothing would ever change. Then everything changed. When I was 11, my mother became seriously ill. At first, everyone believed she would recover after a few weeks of rest. Instead, she grew weaker with each passing month. I still remember seeing her sitting beside the living room window, smiling at me even when I could tell she was hiding her pain. One evening my father sat beside me with tears in his eyes. "Your mom is very sick," he whispered. A few months later, we lost her. After the funeral, our house became painfully quiet. My father tried his best to stay strong, but late at night I often heard him crying behind his bedroom door. We leaned on each other through the hardest years of our lives. For almost 4 years, it was only the two of us. Then, shortly after my 15th birthday, Dad asked if we could talk. He looked more nervous than I had ever seen him. "There is someone I'd like you to meet," he said. I already knew what he meant. "Are you seeing someone?" He slowly nodded. "Her name is Grace." Anger rushed through me. I couldn't believe he had opened his heart to another woman. "What about Mom?" I asked. "No one could ever replace her," he answered gently. "But living with sadness forever isn't the answer either." I refused to accept his explanation. A week later, Grace visited our house carrying a homemade peach pie. She smiled warmly and introduced herself. "It's wonderful to finally meet you, Isabelle." I barely looked at her before walking away without saying a word. That moment became the beginning of years filled with distance. Grace never stopped trying. She remembered my favorite meals, asked about school, celebrated my birthdays, and left encouraging notes before important exams. I ignored every effort. If she asked how my day had gone, I answered with 1 or 2 words. If she offered help, I told her I didn't need it. In my mind, accepting her kindness felt like betraying my mother. A year later, my father married Grace in a quiet ceremony. After the wedding, she moved into our home. She planted colorful flowers near the front porch and replaced a few worn-out curtains in the living room. To everyone else, those were ordinary changes. To me, they felt like someone trying to erase the memories my mother had left behind. My resentment only grew stronger. Dad often asked me to give Grace a chance. "She truly cares about you," he would say. I always gave the same answer. "No, she doesn't." Years passed. I finished college, started working at a marketing company, and eventually moved into my own apartment across town. Although I visited my father often, I never made much effort to build a relationship with Grace. Then one cold winter afternoon, everything changed. While I was at work, my phone rang. It was my father. His voice sounded weak. "Can you come to the hospital?" Fear immediately filled my chest. I grabbed my coat, left work without another question, and drove there as quickly as I could. When I reached his room, I found Dad resting in bed while Grace sat quietly beside him, holding a cup of untouched coffee. She looked completely exhausted. "What happened?" I asked. Dad smiled weakly. "The doctors found a heart problem." I stood there in shock. Then I learned something that hurt almost as much as the news itself. He had been attending medical appointments for several months, and I hadn't known anything about it. I turned toward Grace. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" She lowered her eyes before answering softly. "I asked him many times to call you, but he didn't want you to worry." For the first time in years, I didn't see an enemy standing in front of me. I simply saw a tired woman who had been carrying my father's fears alone. That night, I stayed at the hospital with Grace. Dad slept peacefully while she remained awake, checking on him whenever a nurse entered the room. "You should go home," I told her. She smiled gently. "He has always been there for me. Now it's my turn." The next morning, while Dad was having another test, we sat together in the waiting area. "He talks about you every day," Grace said quietly. "He's proud of the woman you've become." For the first time, I believed every word. A few days later, Dad returned home. As I visited more often, I noticed things I had ignored for years. Grace prepared his meals, organized every medicine, and encouraged him through each difficult day. One afternoon, I found an old photo album on the bookshelf. Inside were pictures of my mother. "You kept these?" I asked. Grace nodded with a soft smile. "Your mother will always be part of this family." Loving your father never meant forgetting her. Her answer broke something inside me. I realized she had never been trying to replace my mother. She had simply been trying to care for the people my mother loved. Tears filled my eyes. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I judged you for years when you did nothing wrong." Grace gently held my hand. "I stopped waiting for an apology a long time ago," she said. "I only hoped one day we'd understand each other." A few months later, we shared dinner together at home. Dad looked healthier and happier than he had in years. As we cleared the table, I reached for Grace's hand. "Thank you, Mom." She froze before tears rolled down her cheeks. Dad smiled quietly, and in that moment our family finally felt whole again. I still miss my mother every single day, and I always will. But I learned that welcoming another kind person into your heart does not erase the love you carry for someone you've lost. Sometimes healing begins the moment we stop fighting the people who are only trying to love us.